we need to address that, the fundamental thing. But I think within that limitations imposed by the functioning of Parliament and within the unintended consequences of the anti-defection law, I think there is potential to measure the individual parliamentarians, because most of these measurement systems are relative to the externalities that we have. So within the externalities, I think there is potential to measure individual parliamentarians, and that comes down to things like attendance, that comes down to things like private bills, that comes down to things like question surveys and so forth. So I think there is potential to get down to creating individual parliamentarian level measurement, which also should be public information, which people like PRS can do or somebody else can do, which I think will create at least some moral incentive for performance. I think that the public information of that, or the non-participation of parliamentarians, I think that itself hopefully will create some kind of pressure on the system. So I think that's the other thing which I wanted to mention. I think fundamentally, I think we have to therefore look at two things from a structural point of view, really look at the whole anti-defection law to allow this much more free conversation so that people have an interest, and then also look at the whole issue of the role that the executive has in essentially circumscribing Parliament, because if they can keep the number of days they keep it open is decided by them. Whether they adjourn it signed or they adjourn it in some other way so that no conference vote is still valid is done by them. So I think that whole relative thing, and is there a way to change that and fix the number of days that it's done without executive sort of participation? I think that's an important part of that. Coming to the oversight issue, which again Bimal talked about, I think there has to be a lot more strategic thinking on oversight, because I think Parliament is probably a place where we can do longer term thinking. The executive is preoccupied with its day-to-day things. And so the longer term strategic issues which we talked about, what is our view on terrorism and how do we secure our borders and so forth? What is our view on the global economic crisis and what is the potential response to that? What is your view on the climate issue and how do we respond to that? I think these are really longer term strategic issues that we face. And I think that debate, the appropriate place for that would be Parliament, because I think the executive will be just too busy with the day-to-day stuff to really have those conversations. And if there is a way that we can perhaps on a cross-party basis at least identify 2 or 3 of these big-ticket issues which have huge strategic consequences for the long-term future of this country, and at least start a process of having conversations on that and arguments on that, which hopefully will not have any immediate legislative consequences. Because I think the problem is, if the only discussion that you have is something that has an immediate legislative consequence, then immediately everything goes down to party lines. And I think, therefore, if there's a way to have conversations which are beyond that, which have no inherent legislative consequence immediately, but which have a longer term process, I think that will help. Finally, I think I would say my interaction with the standing committees has shown a completely different. I've been very impressed with the standing committees. I've interacted with one on urban governance and so forth. I find they are completely non-partisan. There is a genuine attempt by parliamentarians in standing committees to understand the issues, and it's really very refreshing. And therefore, I have a sort of a mixed opinion about whether the standing committee should also be transparent, because my worry is if standing committee also starts coming on Lok Sabha TV or wherever, then automatically people will start grandstanding along party lines, and therefore I think we need to look at that very carefully. But I think the fact that many of the standing committees I met work very well, I think there is a redeeming feature of that, and therefore there is no reason to believe intrinsically we cannot bring in those points into the larger Parliament. And I'm not as Bimal sounds very pessimistic. I think goes away to Parliament and puts his head in his hands and comes back. But my own view is that this country is in a process of change, and I think to expect everything to happen overnight, it's not going to happen. And if you look at the United States, they got their independence in 1776, but only in 1965, after the American Civil Rights Law, that African Americans really got full rights. So it took them close to 200 years to really get everything going, and the women got the right only in 1920 or thereabouts. And therefore this whole process of reform and transparency and all it takes time. And in some sense we are jumping the gun on this in terms of expecting everything to happen overnight. I think my view is that in the next 10 to 15 years you're going to have a dramatic increase in the size of the middle class. You're going to have half a billion people below the age of 20. You're going to have 90% literacy. You're going to have functional English with more than half the population. You're going to have about 40% urbanization. I mean, these are significant trends that we need to recognize. And and automatically, and I guess the Bombay thing is an example of that. I think the concerns will shift. The concerns will shift from the divisiveness of our politics to these kind of issues, whether we have a secure border, whether we're taking care of our public services. And that debate will automatically drive the nature of representation and drive the nature of the conversation. So I would not take today and write everything off. I think I would see it as a trend. I'm very hopeful that when I see the trends that things will change. And I think we should look at, whether you look at the what happened in UK, what happened in France, what happened in the US, what happened in Japan. It took them 50, 100 years from a concept to actually making it a reality. So I wouldn't get so depressed, and I would take a long view, and I'm very positive on the long view. Thank you.